Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're getting into something really fundamental, I think. Why is it so incredibly hard for people, for us, to change our minds, especially when, you're facing a bad idea and the evidence is just piling up?
It's a huge puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because logically, you'd expect that faced with clear proof of being wrong, we'd just adjust.
Yeah, just pivot. But that's often not what happens at all.
Sometimes it seems like the opposite happens. People dig in even more.
Exactly. And we're basing this deep dive on a really fascinating conversation with an expert, someone who uses evolutionary psychology to look at human motivation, how ideas spread, that kind of thing.
Right. And our goal here is to really unpack that discussion. We want to pull out the surprising bits, the insights that make you go, huh. We'll be drawing from psychology, a bit of history, even biology.
All to help you understand this deep resistance to changing course. You see it in big institutions. You see it, well, probably in ourselves sometimes, if we're honest.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start there. The central point from the source, the thing that really stands out, is just how surprising it is that humans can't easily change their minds when faced with overwhelming evidence.
It really is one of maybe the most perplexing things about us. We build these amazing systems of logic and science, but then there's this fundamental stickiness, this inertia when it comes to our own beliefs.
And that brings us straight to this concept of willful blindness, right? It's not just not knowing something.
No, it's more active than that.
It's like you're actively looking away.
Yeah.
The old saying, none so blind as those who will not see. It's like that ostrich metaphor, shoving your head in the sand to avoid something you don't want to deal with.
Yeah, actively avoiding an unwanted reality. And what's really interesting, and maybe a bit maddening if you're the one presenting the evidence, is this paradoxical effect the source talks about. Sometimes showing someone contradictory information doesn't make them question their belief. It actually makes them hold on to it tighter.
Wow. So you think you're opening a door, but you're actually hammering it shut. How does that work?
Well, this is where cognitive dissonance theory comes in. It's that mental discomfort, that tension you feel when you're holding two conflicting ideas or beliefs at the same time.
Like trying to believe X and not X simultaneously, it feels bad.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes that we're sort of wired to get rid of that discomfort. But often the easiest way isn't to change the core belief, especially if it's deeply held.
It's easier to just dismiss the new information.
Right. Reject it, explain it away, twist it somehow. People can be incredibly creative in maintaining the internal consistency of their belief system,
Yeah.
even if it means ignoring reality.
So our brains kind of prioritize avoiding that internal clash over actually accepting a difficult truth.
That seems to be a big part of it. And the source even has this term for it, ostrich parasitic syndrome. A pretty vivid way to describe that active avoidance, that willful blindness.
Just pause and think about that for a second. Have you felt that? Maybe in a discussion where you just couldn't seem to get through. Or even in yourself, that little voice wanting to dismiss something that doesn't fit.
It's a very real, very human thing. We all bump up against it.
Okay, so if it's that powerful, where does this deep resistance come from? The source suggests looking way back into ancient stories.
Yeah, the idea is this isn't some new phenomenon. It's woven into our oldest narratives.
Yeah.
Take the Exodus story, for example.
Yeah.
A key question there is always, why did it take them so long, like 3 generations, to cross a desert that isn't actually that big?
Right, and you've got Pharaoh as the poster child for doubling down.
Oh, absolutely. Plague after plague hits Egypt, destroying everything, and he just keeps refusing to let the Israelites go. He only gives in when it's absolute catastrophe, and even then...
And then he changes his mind again and chases them.
Exactly. He embodies that refusal to see, to adapt, even when it's destroying his present and his future. But the insight goes deeper. According to the source, escaping Egypt, escaping tyranny, isn't just about getting free, crossing the Red Sea. That's presented as stepping into chaos.
So it's not just physical chaos, but internal chaos.
That's the interpretation, the chaos of your whole worldview being shattered. When the old rules, the old structures fall apart.
They left the certainty of oppression for the uncertainty of freedom.
Precisely. They end up in the wilderness, depicted as fractious, unable to manage themselves. Under Pharaoh, they knew their place, even if it was terrible. Freedom meant disorder, ambiguity. And that feeling, that unstructured entropy, it's terrifying.
That seems really key to why we resist change today. That fear of the unknown, of our mental world falling apart if we let go of a core belief.
It really does. And the source draws another parallel from Egyptian myth, the story of Osiris, Seth, and Horus. Osiris is the established order, the state, the institution, but he becomes ossified, rigid, stagnant, and crucially, he's willfully blind. He doesn't see the threat from his brother Seth, who represents chaos, disruption, maybe evil.
So his blindness is his undoing.
Directly. Because he's blind to it, Seth manages to usurp him, chop him up, basically plunge everything into chaos.
Right.
The renewal, the fix, comes from Horus.
Horus, the falcon god, associated with sight.
Exactly. Horus is the one who is willing to see the evil, to confront the chaos. He battles Seth. But the really interesting part in this interpretation is what Horus does with his eye after he gets it back. He doesn't just keep it. He takes his eye, his ability to see clearly down to the underworld, to Osiris, who represents the fragmented, corrupted tradition.
And gives it to him.
Gives the eye to Osiris. It's about uniting clear vision with the past, with tradition, to create a renewed, functional order. So the psychological link is potent. The chaos in these stories. It mirrors that cognitive dissonance, that internal turmoil we feel when our beliefs are challenged. The fear of things falling apart, becoming unstructured, is so powerful it can lock us into existing patterns, even bad ones. Our beliefs are like the rules of the game. Changing them feels like risking total disorder.
Okay, so building on that idea of structures becoming rigid, maybe vulnerable, the source brings in this concept from evolutionary biology, parasitism.
Yeah, it's a really powerful analogy. The source even touches on the theory that sexual reproduction itself might have evolved partly as a defense against parasites.
How so?
Well, by constantly shuffling genes each generation, you create offspring that are slightly different moving targets, basically. Harder for parasites, which reproduce much faster, to adapt to and exploit consistently.
Okay, I see. So how does that apply to ideas?
The thinking is that ideas can act like parasites, too. Parasitic ideas can take root in a person's mind or even within a whole institution, and they use the host's resources, mental energy, institutional funds, reputation for their own spread or survival, but they don't actually contribute to the host's well-being. In fact, they often undermine it.
That's a strong claim. How is it applied?
The source applies this framework specifically to universities. The observation made is that, say, from post-WWII up to maybe the early 2000s, universities were seen as incredibly functional, merit-based places, creating huge value.
But now?
Now, the source uses this striking image. Contemporary universities are like whale carcasses.
Whale carcasses, meaning?
Meaning huge storehouses of value endowments, brand reputation, buildings, talented people that are now being sort of stripped and consumed by these parasitic elements that have moved in.
Okay. Does the source give examples of these parasitic elements?
It does. And just to be clear, we're reporting on the perspective presented in the source material here. One specific example given is the rise of DEI mandates, diversity, inclusion, equity. The argument presented is that these started subtly, maybe back in the 80s, but have become increasingly mandatory, often overriding traditional academic principles like meritocracy.
To what extent?
The source points to a Canadian study suggesting 98% of university job postings there mentioned DEI requirements. The viewpoint offered is that this intense focus marks a significant shift away from the university's original purpose and represents a kind of decline.
And there was a personal story related to this?
Yes, the expert in the source mentions having held a significant university research chair, but choosing not to reapply for it because the process required submitting a DEI statement they felt they couldn't honestly endorse. They described it as feeling forced out of that kind of university-based research funding due to what they saw as ideological requirements.
So the argument being made in the source is that these elements, which they characterize as including things like grievance studies and a kind of resentful mob, aren't just taking resources, but are actually attacking the core spirit of the institution.
That's the claim presented, yes. Attacking the foundational principles of intellectual capability and conscientiousness, which were seen as key to building that value in the first place. Again, just laying out the argument from the source.
Okay, so given this picture, the willful blindness, these potentially parasitic ideas, what does the source say helps individuals navigate all this? What traits are important?
Well, a really big one discussed is conscientiousness. It's one of the big 5 personality traits.
Right, that covers being orderly, organized, but also industrious, hardworking.
Exactly. And the research on it is pretty stark. The source highlights that, second only to general intelligence, or IQ, conscientiousness is the strongest personality predictor of long-term life success.
Success how? Like money.
Yeah, wealth, health, longevity, stable relationships, career success across the board, basically.
And that connects to the idea of sacrifice, right?
Absolutely. Conscientiousness is deeply linked to the willingness to sacrifice. And sacrifice, in this context, is described as the ritual of delay of gratification, or, basically just work.
Giving up something good now for something better later.
Precisely. Giving up immediate comfort or pleasure to invest in the future, to make it more stable and full of opportunity. The source brings up the Abraham story again here, interpreting his life as a series of expanding sacrifices made for a very long-term, future-oriented goal.
The marshmallow test comes to mind immediately.
The classic example, kids who could wait for the second marshmallow. They tended to have much better outcomes later in life on all sorts of measures. It shows how fundamental that ability to delay gratification is.
Is that ability fixed, though?
Interestingly, no, not entirely. The source notes it can be influenced by things like your immediate state. If you're full, you're better at delaying food gratification, obviously, but also by evolutionary triggers.
Like what?
Like studies showing that priming men with images of attractive women can make them more impulsive, more focused on immediate rewards in totally unrelated areas, as if the mating drive kind of overrides the future planning circuits temporarily.
Huh. Okay, so conscientiousness and sacrifice are key. What else? There's the risk of speaking out, too.
Right, the courage aspect. The source contrasts the risk of speaking up against things you see as wrong or untrue with the internal cost of not speaking up. There's that quote mentioned, "There's no pillow like a good conscience."
Meaning you sleep better if you act according to your values.
That's the idea. The expert describes feeling driven by a personal, exacting code where not speaking truth would feel like a betrayal of self, and puts the risks faced for speaking out in Western societies into perspective, comparing them to the very real dangers faced by people documenting atrocities elsewhere.
Fair enough. What about openness? That's another personality trait.
Yes, openness to experience. The source brings up Frank Selway's born to rebel idea here.
About birth order.
Yeah, the theory that later-born children might tend to be higher in openness because they sort of have to find their own niche, intellectually or socially, that isn't already taken by older siblings. This might make them more likely to be radical innovators or unconventional thinkers, the expert notes being a last-born themselves and identifying as a non-orthodox thinker.
Interesting potential link there. And one last thing mentioned was connecting different fields of knowledge.
That's right. Consilience. That's E.O. Wilson's term. The unity of knowledge. The source really stresses the importance of building bridges between disciplines. To understand the really big, complex issues, you can't just stay in your narrow specialty. You need to integrate insights from ancient myths, from psychology, from biology, from history.
Like we've been trying to do in this conversation.
Exactly. The expert's own work is presented as an attempt to do that, to resist hyper-specialization and seek that broader understanding.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've really dug into why changing our minds is just so darn difficult. We looked at the psychology behind it, things like willful blindness, cognitive dissonance, that deep fear of internal chaos.
And we explored how those ancient stories, like Exodus or the Osiris myth, seem to capture these timeless human struggles.
Yeah, then we got into this challenging idea of parasitic ideas, drawing that analogy from biology, and how the source suggests these might be affecting institutions like universities, consuming value, and maybe even attacking their core spirit.
Right, reporting on that specific perspective. And then we shifted to the personal qualities that seem crucial for navigating all this complexity.
Things like conscientiousness that drive to be orderly and work hard, to sacrifice for the future, the courage to actually see things clearly and speak truthfully even when it's tough, and that openness to new ideas, combined with the effort to connect knowledge across different fields, consilience.
It really brings together insights from so many areas, doesn't it? Ancient wisdom, evolution, psychology, all shedding light on challenges we face right now.
Understanding these forces, our own resistance to change, the ways bad ideas can spread and take hold seems like a really crucial first step.
Yeah, awareness is key. It makes you pause and look a bit closer.
So here's something to maybe chew on after this. Given how powerful willful blindness is and how these parasitic ideas can operate almost unseen, exploiting our inertia, where might this be playing out in your world, in your own thinking maybe, or in the groups and organizations you're part of? What's the potential cost of not seeing it? And maybe more importantly, what would it actually take? What kind of sight, what kind of courage to see more clearly and maybe help steer things in a better direction?